I'm going to tell a story to start with, and then I'm going to talk to you about what telling this story can teach us about being storytellers in our classroom and working in storytelling with kids, using the authentic folktale collections like the Household Tales of the Brothers Grimm that we've got, or English Fairy Tales by Joseph Jacobs, or any number of the world folktales and fairy tales collections that we've looked at in class. This story is The Cat and Mouse in Partnership. You might have read it in Grimm's Fairy Tales. I have a particular telling of it that comes from my reading of this and from spending time working with kids. The cat and the mouse both came through the alleyway and found this pot of peanut butter at exactly the same time. And they looked at each other and talked about it for a second and decided they were going to go into business together. They said to each other, when all the other animals are starving in the middle of winter, we'll have this huge jar of peanut butter to keep us sustained throughout the middle of the winter. And so they just said, where are we going to hide this jar of peanut butter so that the other animals don't get their hands on it? And so they took the jar of peanut butter and they took it all around the town trying to find some place where the other animals wouldn't go. And finally, they decided they were going to hide this jar of peanut butter under the altar in the middle of the church, because that was a place where nobody ever went and nobody ever looked. And so they went about the rest of their business, and the late fall came, and the early winter was on them, and they started to get a little bit more hungry and had to search around for food, but they were still good partners. But then one day the cat said to the mouse, you know, one of my relations had kittens, and they want me to stand as godfather for one of the kittens and give that kitten its name. And so the mouse said, well, go ahead and take some time off and go do that and come back and we'll start looking for other things to eat. And so the cat went, and the first thing the cat did when it got to the church was it went right to the altar, and it opened the top of that jar of peanut butter and skimmed all of the top right off of that jar of peanut butter, the best fatty bits of it, and it was really good, and he was really hungry, and he went back to the mouse. Kind of licking his paws and cleaning himself up, and when he got there, the mouse said, what did they name the kitten? And the cat had to think quickly, and he said, oh, they named it Top Off. And the mouse said, oh, that's a very strange name. And the cat said, well, they're Russian cats, and Top Off is a good Russian-sounding name. And so a few days, a few weeks went by, and the cat and the mouse were still working together in partnership, and the cat started thinking, and he was a little bit more hungry, and so he said, well, one of my other relations has had a kitten, and I need to go and stand as godfather for that one as well. And the mouse said, oh, well, all right then. And so the cat went, and he went right to the altar, and he opened up that jar of peanut butter, and he scooped out enough of it for it to be half gone. And when he came back, the mouse said, what did they name this child? And the cat said, they named it Half Gone. And the mouse said, that's a strange name. And the cat said, well, they're Swedish cats, and so Hafgun is a really good Swedish name for a kitten. And the mouse said, oh. And so they went about their business again for a few more weeks, and finally the cat was quite hungry again, and he said, I've got to go stand godfather one more time. And the cat said, you sure have a lot of relations having kittens lately. And the cat said, I can't do anything about that. And he went off to the church. He opened up the jar and he scooped up the last bits of the peanut butter, and it was all gone. And he went back to the mouse, and the mouse said, well, what did they name the kitten this time? And the cat said, well, this time I named the kitten Fully Gone. And the mouse said, well, that's a very strange name indeed. And the cat said, well, they're Irish cats, and Fullygon is quite a good Irish name. And the mouse thought for a second, and he said, Top Off, Half Gone, Fully Gone. You haven't been going to name those kittens at all. You've been going there, and you've been taking our great pot of fatty peanut butter and eating it for yourself. And the cat cleaned up the last of his mouth and said, you've caught me. It's all gone, and there's nothing one can do. And the mouse was angry and said, you see, now we will have no food in the middle of winter when we are starving. And the cat looked at the mouse and said, "I will." So when I told that story to my daughter when she was a little girl, the very first time I told it to her, she was probably about 3 years old, and she just got the biggest eyes ever, and she said, "The cat is going to eat that mouse." And just leaving that little bit of inference there at the end was enough, and doing a little bit of the eyes at the end with the cat being a little bit evil and manipulative, it was enough for a small child to be able to get the sense that, oh, I know how this story is going to end. And that's a different ending than the one that you'd see in the Grimm's fairy tales, and it's just one that I stumbled on in telling this aloud, not only to my own kids, but to classrooms. And I have about between 10 and 15 of these stories that I can tell out loud to people at the drop of a hat. And it's because I've practiced them, but also because I wasn't afraid to do something. I wasn't afraid to use notes to help myself learn those stories. And it got to the point with my own kids to where I read them books at night before they were about to go to bed, but I also told them these stories from my repertoire, about 10 or 15 of them. And one night when I was getting ready to read a book to Bella, she just stopped me, put her hand on the book and said, "Dad, can you tell me a story with just your words?" And it was then that I realized that she had developed a taste or a preference for hearing a story that didn't come from a book. And I'd like you to think about that. That's what these folktale and fairy tale traditions have to offer for us, is a sense that they might start in a book, and we might get those stories from a book, but getting them out of the book and putting them into our lives is a big deal. So when I run into a story, let's see, I'm pointing up here to the Cat and Mouse in Partnership. When I run into a story that I like, that really speaks to me from a World Folktales collection, I get it out of the book. And how do I get it out of the book? I find out what are the motifs, what are the little patchwork pieces of this story that you have to keep in order for it to be this story, and I put those pieces of the story on a note card for myself, and this is my mnemonic device. This is my storytelling equipment. I just have the cat and the mouse, the pot and the jar, I have that they hid it in a church, and then I have that little routine about the naming of the kittens. And if you think about it, this routine here of the naming of the kittens, that's the motif that makes the middle of this story work. The beginning and the ending are just ways of getting in and out of the story, but a cat and mouse going in partnership and the cat figuring out a way to trick the mouse is the heart and the core of this story. If I can figure out any way to tell that and fiddle with it and make it do something different, that's my prerogative as a storyteller. I do not ever try to memorize the story as the Grimm brothers did it, because one of the reasons the Grimm brothers actually collected their stories was that they believed in this idea of a folk tradition, which is to say that even if a story originated in print at some point, it's the passing along by storytellers that makes it live. And maybe printing it again will make it live a little bit more, but is it a memorable story? That motif in the middle of the names is the one that tends to make this story memorable. So what I've got up here for you on the screen is I've got up Daniel Ashleman's website. Daniel Ashleman is a great folklorist at University of Pittsburgh who has taken world folktales and cataloged them, had his students and graduate assistants and himself put these together and put them up on the internet. So this is his name right here, Daniel Ashleman, and if I click to this, you'll just see that the very first page, it's just his catalog of folk tales and urban legends and everything that's out there, and not just the original or first one that he was able to collect, but all the versions and variants that he's able to find. So that's what the numbered lists are there. This tale, Cat and Mouse in Partnership, if I flip through it and see his ideas here, this is a motif. Stealing the Partner's Butter, additional folk tales from the Arne Thompson Folk Index, type number 15. So there are a bunch of stories like this, and when I click on that, here's what we get. We get the fox and the bear in partnership. The fox cheats the bear out of his Christmas food, the fox and the wolf, the keg of butter, the cat and the mouse in partnership, and Mr. Rabbit nibbles up the butter. I've got 6 different versions of this that I can go to figure out, oh, are there other ways that I could tell the middle of this story that would make it more fun and interesting? And I can just see that there are going to be versions and variants of this story, and this is African American. This is Uncle Remus, the tradition that Walt Disney pulled on for his movie Song of the South. You know, the song Zippity Doo Dah, Zippity A. So this is a story that I like to go back to because it has some versions and variants that I can work with, and I know that this is a motif that resonates with people over hundreds of years and across different cultures. Those are the bits of story that I want to work with the most in my classroom, and so I go to the Motif Index and I look up these motifs. I go to other internet sources where I can find these resources. So the clever fox and other wild animals. I'm going to find a lot of these bits and pieces of story just by flipping through some of these resources. So let's see. And this is the other thing that Daniel Ashleman does for us, is he gives us good source material. So I'm just going to say this one thing and then be finished. So the Grimm Brothers homepage and the Grimm Brothers Children's and Household Tales. If I click on that one, I can get to the original German version of this, the books that people like Daniel Ashleman were using when they were, move that over, doing the translation and the work to put these things together for us. And this is one of the original versions, probably the 1857 version of the Grimm's fairy tales. The version that I told hews a little bit more closely to the original manuscript versions that the Grimm brothers collected way back in between 1808 and 1812, and didn't ever really make it into popular publication. But some of those early versions were a little bit more pared down, a little bit more like these sort of bullet notes that I was putting out there, and can be a little bit more interesting for telling. So I'd like you to do one thing. I'd like you to go back to either the Grimm Fairy Tales collection that you have or the World Folk Tales that you looked at, and think about what is one motif in the center there of that story that you think is what makes it memorable for you. And let's go back to the Ashleman page here. And I'll put up a link to Daniel Ashleman's website in Blackboard so that you can get to it. But what I'd like you to know is that just entering some of these Grimm's fairy tales in, if you see a University of Pittsburgh address come up as one of the first ones, that's Daniel Ashleman's website. And you'll get there pretty quick. Also, the place that I'm going to post this is just this, I'm going to post this folk texts main link where you can just kind of go through in alphabetical order and start searching for things. You've got a page 2 that starts the N's through the Z's and so on. But you can see that the name of the helper isn't what you would think of first if you were trying to look up Rumpelstiltskin. You would look under the R's and it may or may not be there. Let's just have a look. See, Rumpelstiltskin isn't there. You'd have to search around a little bit to find your story. The Runaway Pancake, you know it as the Gingerbread Boy or the Gingerbread Man. So you're going to need to search around a little bit. It's a little bit easier to just do that out in Google instead of flipping around in here. So if I'm just going to go up to my Google bar and just search Ashleman Gingerbread, I get to that Runaway Pancake thing pretty quickly there, and I see that there are 14 different versions there, and also links to related sites that I can go to see different versions and variants of this in world folklore. All right, talk to you again soon.